All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We're about a minute and a half after the top of the hour. Hopefully, everybody's doing fantastic out there. Appreciate everybody making us a part of your day, your morning, your evening, your afternoon, wherever you may be. So we appreciate everybody jumping on. This is the Green Cloud Defense and CODA webinar, where we want to chat with you all just a little bit about prioritizing vulnerabilities, and obviously a landscape that changes in this day and age quite frequently these days. So a little bit about us and who's on the line with us today, just so everybody knows. You got myself, JP. I run the sales channel here at Green Cloud Defense and have been a part of the team now since, 2013. So 8.5 years now. It's been a long time coming. And for those of you who know me, who have ever shuttled around on any of the events, yes, we pack styrofoam coolers, we have fun, and we take big buses wherever we go. So that's enough about me. More importantly are the people that we've got on the line with us this afternoon. I've got Chris Sandescu. He runs and owns CODA, which is our vulnerability scanning partner. We're totally stoked and excited to have him here on the line with us today. So Chris, thank you for joining. Appreciate that. Everybody will pick up on his very Southern US-based accent here very shortly. So also along with me is Steve Sims. He's our VP of Security. He's our CISO here at Green Cloud Defense. Prior to Green Cloud, obviously was one of the founding members of Cascade Defense, and prior to that, he spent a meaningful amount of time in the Air Force. So as we kick things off, let's just go through an agenda and just some minor housekeeping items, of which we'll keep the list short. But the whole point here is to be intentional and interactive. So as you have questions, by the way, in all transparency, disclaimer here, I'm the world's potential worst at looking at some of the chat, but I'm going to do my best to keep up with it. But if you have questions, please throw those into the chat, and I'm going to throw that out on for my accountability partner, Steve and Chris, to help me look at that as well. So pose questions as we kind of go and navigate through the waters here today. Let's have some fun, meaningful conversation, and hopefully at the end of this, you all can walk away here with some tangible nuggets, right, of some useful information. Also, throughout the conversation, we are going to have a couple polling questions, and that is to keep the content interactive. We want to hear from you as these two steer the conversation. So with that being said, for those of you who are new to Green Cloud Defense from a partnering perspective, just to give everybody a heads up, I'll take 30 seconds to a minute on this. We've got 6 US-based data centers that we operate out of, and within the United States, we offer 5 core products, right? We have infrastructure as a service, or servers in the cloud. We offer backup, offsite backups for those who want to take us up on that, as well as a whole host of disaster recovery and business continuity solutions that you can actually work with your on-premise deployments for, or you can replicate from one of our data centers to another one of our data centers. And we'll work with you to kind of work backwards based on your RTO and RPO strategies, and kind of pair your business goals with the right solution according to you and for your clients. We also offer desktop, us being a VMware partner, as the logo states there right in the middle. We offer VMware's Horizon DAS product for desktop deployments. And then the 5th product that we have is one of the reasons why we're here today, is our whole host of security offerings. So we do everything from managed firewall to managed mail, managed SIEM, EDR, as well as vulnerability scanning, or continuous risk scanning, as we like to call it today, which our partner CODA, i.e. Chris, is here. So that's what we'll chat about. So part of the conversation that you should be expecting today is we're going to talk a little bit about the security landscape, and obviously, if you haven't turned on any news media in the past month, week, day, year, whatever the case may be, you'll know that it changes frequently. We're also going to walk through to help you assess and better understand some of the drivers in terms of understanding what's critical and as far as the critical impacts for your business. And I'm going to throw this out while we discuss what is left on the agenda. From a polling perspective, I am curious to understand from a sales perspective, what do you use for your sales motion? So hang on one second. Bear with me. Let me throw this out there. So just chime in if you don't mind, as you all would see how you would answer it. Also, we're going to talk about scanning early and often, as well as what available data is that you may have according to you. Give it just another second before we move on, and then I'm going to kind of move on quickly so we can get into the conversation. So we had very interesting. So net new accounts looks like it is taking the lead, just so everybody knows. And then obviously from an upselling perspective, interesting. Very cool, very cool. So there you go. If I were smart enough to launch these, I'd tell you that I would do that. But needless to say, they pay me by the hour here, folks. So here we go. Let's get into it. So Steve, why don't you kick us off, and then let's just have a meaningful conversation. We go through some stats and how that translates to the working world.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, JP. We at Green Cloud, if you have attended any of our webinars in the past, we try to stay away from FUD as much as possible. But I think we do a bit of disservice if we don't talk about what the true landscape is, and kind of set the stage for what we need to be discussing and what we need to solve from a cybersecurity and really IT professional perspective here. The statistics that I've grabbed here were primarily gathered from the National Vulnerability Database itself, which is maintained by NIST, and then some other resources just around the internet. But I think it paints a pretty good picture about a couple of things. The first is that obviously there's more vulnerabilities out there. There are more organizations out there looking for vulnerabilities, both white hat and black hat, and maybe a little bit of gray in the middle, right? These organizations are either just taking the opportunity to exploit vulnerabilities that they find and do the absolute wrong thing. And then some organizations are out there to provide meaningful actionable data to us as IT professionals in order to secure our environments more effectively, right? The other thing that it kind of shows us a little bit here is that there's a mechanism for organizations that did not exist 5, 7, 10 years ago around vulnerabilities that exist in products and the sheer number of products that are in the marketplace now from a technology perspective. So a few of the key highlights that I want to bring in is in 2021 we saw more than 20,000 vulnerabilities that were reported to the National Vulnerability Database. That's a whole lot. That's 55 new vulnerabilities every day. And so when you talk about like the importance of scanning and the importance of getting out there and knowing what's in your environment, 55 new vulnerabilities, yeah, maybe let's say 1 to 2 to 3 might apply to your environment that you're working with or your customers' environments. That's a lot of data to track. Chris, I don't know if you have a bit of color to throw around that. Like that's an insane number of vulnerabilities that we just need to look at. And 10 years ago, like we were lucky to get 3 to 5 a week, right?
Right.
But it's incredible, isn't it?
A lot of them are, this trend is being accelerated in the past 2 years. So, we're not used to seeing these volumes here. But what's also interesting is the fact that we used to see attackers really kind of target organizations. That was mainly their thing before the pandemic. But what we're seeing in the last 2 years is we're seeing a lot of non-targeted attacks, just spraying out, casting wide nets and catching everything that's in that net, from a very small organization to really huge ones. Like, in 2020, we've got SolarWinds. 2021, we've got Microsoft's Exchange, and then Kaseya. And, those were just a couple of them.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I always, when I was talking to people out here in the Pacific Northwest about, why vulnerabilities were important to them and why securing their edge and having a secure environment on the internet, why that's important. A lot of them would say, oh, I'm just from a small town here in, whatever, North Idaho or Western Montana. Nobody in China or Russia is even looking for me, much less, targeting my organization for an attack. But malicious folks aren't doing that anymore, right? They are, as you mentioned, casting a wide net, just trying to spray out malicious intent. And if they land on a specific IP address, that they don't care where that actually exists from a physical location perspective, they're going to do that, right? And all of these vulnerabilities could exist right on your edge, right on those publicly available internet-facing services, right?
So break this down for me. I'm a partner today. Let's play make believe. I'm a managed services partner of Green Cloud Defense, and I'm supporting the work from anywhere concept today. Now I'm working out of my house, and I may be that 500-person organization, which is an end user for one of our partners. How critical is it to continue to scan always? Because if I'm working from home, I'm probably sharing the home with other people in the house. That could be my 17-year-old son or daughter, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny is that brings something into play that wasn't necessarily there prior to this pandemic, right? Which is the IoT in a household network and a household environment is actually critical to business infrastructure and business security now, right? Because vulnerabilities that exist on your Ring doorbell or on your kid's Echo that is sitting on their dresser or whatever it might be, actually, has some legitimacy to how vulnerable the overall environment is, and then that doesn't even cover, the idea of folks using maybe non-enterprise, non-customer domain joined devices, right? Non-controlled devices where they're just accessing your critical infrastructure, your environment from the same PC that night somebody's going to jump on and play their favorite, Call of Duty game or whatever else, right? Or visit Facebook and TikTok and et cetera, right? So, it just widens the threat landscape there to really a ridiculously extreme amount. And I think we saw a lot of vulnerabilities associated with those home and more personal type devices, IoT devices and others, than we saw in the past. To get back to the slides, and as you guys know, we like to just kind of have some conversation around this. But the point that Christian was trying to make is attackers scan the internet, find a vulnerability, exploit it, and then they have automated capabilities to go out there and encrypt or take action in an environment that's completely malicious. They're doing it effectively, they're doing it quickly, and they're spraying it out there, and have zero regard for exactly who they're attacking, right? They just find an IP address and exploit it, and exploit the vulnerabilities associated with that. Some of the discussions around how remote workforce comes into play here it actually pertains to how you create policy and how you create a working environment for your organization, and how these users operate. Chris, can you kind of go into a little bit about what you're seeing from, you have a much wider variety of different types of customers, and how remote access and remote workforce has changed how they're doing vulnerability management as a whole?
Well, I think vulnerability, the way you do vulnerability management really changes by the business model. So we really saw, like everybody else, we really saw a shift in like what normal operations are and what the new network perimeter is. There's basically no more traditional network perimeter out there, right? So everybody's working from home, a lot of digital acceleration, which means a lot of cloud adoption. So, your traditional security controls may or may not be still there, depending on how fast that growth was and how structured it was. So I think it's a good time to be taking a look at those fundamentals like cyber hygiene and all of that, which is, it's starting to be mandated because we're seeing a spike in attacks. So we're, first half of 2021, we saw like more than 1,000% spike in data breaches.
Yeah.
Those were especially around SMBs, and that's, those go hand in hand with the kind of numbers we're looking at from a vulnerability.
Absolutely, it's significant growth in just the risk that's associated with having a remote workforce. It's a significant thing for sure.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I was just going to say, for the poll that I just shared for you two, so everybody ranked firewall and VPNs as being the number one. Web apps came in at number two, so it's obviously telling, right?
It is telling. And one thing I'd like to add to what Steve was mentioning earlier is it's not just exposed surface that you can scan from the outside, because that's where, now you're looking at that's the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about a perimeter. But it's also those internal vulnerabilities which are on the devices themselves that aren't necessarily accessible from the internet, from the outside, but those are called, like, drive-by attacks and client-side attacks, in which you as an end user, you're just browsing the internet, and something comes in, and we've got a lot of those. For example, recently in January, Apple just patched vulnerabilities all across their products that were allowing for remote exploitation on the client side. So
it's definitely telling, that's for sure. So walk us through, from an assessment standpoint, what are your thoughts here? I mean, what should we do first, and how should we do it, and how often should we do it?
Yeah, if anybody has listened to us talk at either one of the events that we're at, or as part of a webinar, that we're always pushing very heavily, taking a look at the CIS top 18 critical controls. And one of the first things, and I harp on this, I beat the horse as dead as it could possibly be, but inventory is so incredibly important and is critical to having an idea of what you have. If you don't have any clue about the software, the hardware, how your users are using your environment, the actual operational capabilities that exist in your environment, if you don't have a good picture of what that looks like, you can't even hope to understand how vulnerable you might be because of those systems that are in place. And you pair this with, we brought on a whole lot of new stuff, and we've seen, even just with the use of Zoom, which wasn't something that was necessarily unused prior to the pandemic, but had extreme adoption because of the pandemic, right? But even something as simple as that brought a lot of vulnerability into things like school board meetings and just online classes and things like that, right? And there was a lot of uncontrolled ability. So my point in saying all of that is, like, knowing what you currently have, but also molding that into understanding how new systems, new software, new hardware brings new vulnerabilities into the environment is key and critical. And you don't understand what that looks like without inventory and doing your proper due diligence from that perspective.
If I can add something here. Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
What I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about inventory, I'm also thinking about how that inventory is linked to the business processes and how it translates to business risk. Because I think a lot of our partners and in being successful as an MSP is really about talking to the client about their business and understanding and being able to map the vulnerabilities and the assets to the actual business data, and then taking the appropriate controls to secure those depending on their criticality to the business, not just taking the same steps for everything. It would be insane. I mean, the budgets that we would be looking at would be outrageous if we just try to throw every cyber solution at
right.
every organization.
Money solves all, right? Theoretically. But I think what we're looking at today, and as we talk through this, like to that third bullet point there, you have to plan ahead. This isn't something you can do after the fact. or you're going to significantly delay your response. And I don't think it's any different from, 10, 12 years ago when we were first trying to talk about, cloud and disaster recovery and even backup options for our customers, right? Having that conversation about, you need to know what you need to protect and what's critical to your business ahead of time. It's if you're in a disaster type of response, timeline, you don't have the time to go back and now try to understand what it is you need to protect. And the same kind of mentality, pardon me, the same kind of idea exists here. And JP, you were very integral, however you want to say it, to that, kind of selling cloud and selling what disaster recovery is, and having conversations with businesses. How did that go initially when we were first talking about it from just a disaster recovery and backup standpoint? I think there's some translated similarities here for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, 100%. There's no doubt. I mean, I would say that they're very similar, right? I mean, if we actually rewound what our thought processes were about bringing up cloud adoption as it would relate to offsite backup, number one, number two, disaster recovery, business continuity plans, and then furthermore, if you think through how hard it was to articulate benefits of consuming cloud-based servers for our infrastructure and anything that you're going to use as production in the cloud, those concepts were crazy back, 10, 15 years ago, but then they kind of kept on, and obviously they have legs now. I mean, what I would say is that the same focus and intentional conversations need to be had early and often with all of our partners, and our partners need to have those customer interactions at the conversation level. So whether you're doing QBRs quarter over quarter, or maybe it's just a solution or a strategy session annually, you need to be dripping those in front of your clients, because I think that I was once told this probably 20 years ago, if you're not messaging how your product solves solutions for your end users, you can guarantee that somebody else is, and usually that's a competitor, and that's not what we want. So I would say that the folks that started pivoting a couple years ago and started dropping in the fact that security is not a set it and forget it mindset anymore, that it's an evolution and a very fluid conversation, are those people that find it very easy to articulate and make meaningful understanding for their end users. I would also say, Steve, to answer that directly, the people that can actually do the business translation of taking the product set and the solutions in which the products solve, going back to their end users and to really make the business owner understand what the impact is of vulnerability scanning and minimizing that risk is huge. So if nothing else, definitely take the time to understand your clients, their compliance needs, their risks, and then obviously what does it mean in the event that they are impacted. I had a question that someone texted me, and I think this is probably for Steve because it's kind of up here on the slide, and it's this. It's what was our response, Green Cloud's response from a security perspective, as it would relate to the Log4 shell?
Yeah, I mean, part of our response actually involved Chris and his team as well, right? But a lot of the things that we had in place, we had some inventory in place that allowed us to determine our vulnerability upfront and very quickly. We still relied, and I mention it here, there's a huge reliance on vendors regardless, because when you go out and acquire an appliance and don't have visibility into everything that runs on that appliance, you're not going to know that. But so even we still had some delay in response with regards to that. But a lot of our response was from a escalation perspective, we were able to get to remediation of some of these vulnerabilities as quickly as vendors released the updates. And we were, kind of ahead of the curve in saying, hey, where are we at on this update? You have this vulnerability within your system. And thankfully, luckily to guys like Chris, who built some ability to scan and determine vulnerabilities within our environment. Also, Huntress did an excellent job. Just to, we're throwing out names here, but I think they did an excellent job in the MSP space in providing tools and capabilities for folks to find out their vulnerabilities. And we used all of these tools to our advantage in order to determine how vulnerable we were. And because of that, we were able to take very quick action in our environment and remediate a lot of these vulnerabilities even though we had a reliance on the vendors, we were pushing them for fixes. We were pushing them to tell us, and then we were putting workarounds in that were made as compensating controls to minimize our risk and our exposure to that. So I think it's worth Chris talking about, you know, his team's capability to provide a tool on a very quick timeline to the, you know, to the channel as a whole and to his partners as well.
Actually, we were one of the first vendors to have a full stack approach to Log4Shell, and we're very proud of that because, you know, it was announced on December 10, but we already knew about it because of the NLP techniques that we're using in our threat intel feed. So we knew something's coming up in the Java, so we started looking into those, and we had the RLEs delivered on basically December 11. So that's when we started detecting Log4Shell. And, you know, we're doing deep detections, you know, not just in the names of the vulnerable apps and stuff like that. We were actually looking at the vulnerable code. So we even had situations in which some vendors renamed the libraries that were vulnerable, but they didn't change the code inside. So yeah, that was unfortunate. And, you know, the entire chaos that was created around Log4Shell really showed structural weaknesses in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. And you know, JP pushed on into this slide, and I think this is a perfectly timely chance to step into this, because, you know, having that inventory is key. But then if you don't turn around and build strategies based on the inventory, based on the assessment that you've done in your environment, and turn that around, you don't have the opportunity to have a quick response to something like Log4Shell in the future, right? It's all future planning, right? And taking a proactive approach in your environment. So, you know, some of the things that we have talked about as part of a scanning strategy is confirming the scope of your scans. You know, for very large organizations, understanding exactly what you need to scan, when, how, and why. That's also part of that inventory process and what you're going to deliver as part of that data. But for small organizations and even MSPs and their customers, you know, I have to say that, and I'd love to understand whether, you know, Chris, if you agree with me or disagree with me, but I think you scan everything. You know, put your entire addressable IP space into your scanner and scan absolutely everything. It's going to give you the best idea of what your true risk exposure is. If you're just applying specific IP addresses and only scanning those you know, single, you know, /32 hosts, then you're limiting yourself to not understand your true full risk exposure there.
And yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think it provides a lot of value in just making sure that the controls you've designed and the policies you want to have in place are actually in place across all those devices. So whenever you identify new devices coming into the network, you know what to do with them. As soon as, you know, you get into all those configuration scanning, which is, you know, very kind of important, especially if we're thinking about the CIS controls, IG1 and CIS benchmark and all of that. It's not just the software patching, which I agree, it's probably like 80% of the vulnerabilities are coming from software updates, but it's a lot of additional things like, you know, simple users and passwords, and you know, vulnerabilities in web applications that don't even have CVEs associated with them, and all of that, and then cloud vulnerabilities and MFA, and, you know, properly configuring the security controls and being able to monitor that easily. I think that's paramount to understanding, you know, how that risk profile of the customer is evolving over time.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw this out there as it would relate to, I guess, translating cost back to the business, if you will. And I'm having lunch with one of our partners that's actually traveling from Birmingham, Alabama, up to Greenville, South Carolina this coming week. Actually, he's here now, Bill Halligan. He may be on here. And I know the conversation will come up of what happens when a customer pushes back on me by saying, yeah, you advocating to scan everything versus just a subset of my IP addresses. But what if I can't afford it? How would you guys, from a technical perspective, address that concern?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm talking through that concern, I think it gives me an opportunity to understand what their business critical assets are, right? And if you get nothing else out of this, like prioritizing vulnerabilities regardless to meet the business risk, not necessarily just the IT risk, but the business risk overall, is going to be like the biggest benefit to your environment, right? And so the strategy that I go into there is, all right, tell me exactly what your business critical assets are. And if they can't, then that gives you an opportunity to say, okay, well, maybe, if your business is shut down because you haven't scanned your entire environment, maybe this is an opportunity for you to understand everything that's in your environment and begin that inventory process, right? So it gives you an opportunity to say that. But if the cost factor of this, which the per IP cost of this type of service is not extravagant, right? We're talking, really, very inexpensive type of services and capabilities here that offer a ton of value and a ton of visibility into what your environment looks like. But I use that as an opportunity to just have that business risk conversation with them and take it to a different level. Because if you're talking to a CEO, president, CFO, somebody like that doesn't necessarily have the technical know-how, the technical acumen, so to speak, then you have an opportunity to bring it into their world and say, all right, what are your critical assets? What's the biggest risk to your company? And let's start with securing that. And once we secure that and feel comfortable about that, then let's move on to other assets and see if budget opens up. And then you have the opportunity to say, all right, we had your critical business assets. We had 3,000 vulnerabilities across these assets on day one. Now we have 150. Obviously, what we're doing is working. We've significantly reduced our risk exposure. And do you value what we did there? If so, maybe let's talk about expanding our scanning capabilities and taking a look at your entire environment to see how we can further reduce your risk.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the old school analogy that you had asked me about, the translation between leveraging this just in the same format as what we did with business backup, business continuity, if you will, from back in the day, where we would, right size somebody's environment by prioritizing servers and then replicating certain workloads over to a different data center in the event of catastrophic events. So very meaningful there for sure. Bear with me. So how do we use data to prioritize as we continue this?
Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but really the idea is taking everything you've learned to date, right? So you've done your assessment in your environment, you've determined what your business critical assets are, you've determined what your true scope of your scans needs to be. You've scanned that environment, and now based on that information, you can take those bits and pieces and essentially do a mathematical operation to determine where your critical assets are and how you need to prioritize vulnerability remediation across those assets. And if you look at the third bullet there, you're combining the business criticality and prioritization that you've kind of already done by virtue of just doing a business risk assessment. And you're combining that with the existing compensating controls, finding your residual risk, and then applying your prioritization to that residual risk mechanism, right? That leftover amount of risk that is in place after you factor in your compensating controls in that, and that's where you prioritize. A lot of the resources that we use and that we look at, and some of the info that's out there really talks about the fact that don't focus on those vulnerabilities that maybe don't have any real life exploitation capability or possibility. Focus on those vulnerabilities that truly have a real exploitation. And I'm kind of setting Chris up here a little bit to talk about his RLE, as he already mentioned here. But the idea is, like, you, especially as an MSP, you don't have a ton of time in that customer or with that customer to talk through the plan that you're going to have in place. You don't have a ton of bodies to just throw at remediating every vulnerability in an environment. So if you use that residual risk kind of element and then apply real life exploitation scores, which I'll let Chris talk to in a minute, to understand what your true prioritization needs to be, then that's going to help you get there a hell of a lot more quickly. And as that last bullet there says, and I've added this purposely on multiple slides, if you have valuable and actionable output from your scans, and Chris will cover part of this as well, it's going to save you time and energy, which obviously equals money, right?
Yeah, and Steve, looking at what you said, that sounds like a kind of a complex process, but how difficult is it to be done with CRS and kind of your support, your SOX team's support from an MSP perspective?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we've done is chosen a product, which is Coda Intelligence, to help us to get there. And a part of the entire architecture and ecosystem of Coda Intelligence and how it scans is providing some real life exploitation data. Chris and his team go out and factor in exactly what they're seeing across various honeypots, honey nets, just out in the wild through every shape and form that you can find real life exploitation that's out there, and take that and actually integrate it into the score that we provide as an output from Coda Intelligence, and helps you to prioritize that. So what we work with you on as a SOC is understanding how to help prioritize those vulnerabilities. And we've already taken that hard work out of it in determining what that real life exploitation is. And we just apply it to those residual risks, that business criticality, and help you to determine what that prioritization truly looks like. And that's part of what we do with obviously Chris's technology's assistance in doing that, and applying the machine learning AI type technology capacities to help us to do that within the platform itself.
Right. So one of the most important outputs, besides those risk reports and vulnerability reports, are the actual remediation plans, which are designed for IT operational teams. Then they're very specific on what needs to be done to reduce the highest amount of risk, either at the entire organization level, or by looking at a very specific business system. And that translates to what we're talking earlier about having those business risk conversations, which are really important to kind of understand what the policy should be and what the resources allocated to that to respect that policy. I mean, it's one thing to be patching everything in hours or the first day of them appearing or being there, and then it's a totally different thing to look at them and say these are actually exploitable and they're on business critical assets of our customers. So we need to take a look at those first, and then we can deal with the others during normal patching cadence and stuff like that. So this is an output that's already there.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you can't do, and I've already said I'm going to beat this horse dead all day long, but it comes back to your inventory. If you don't know and understand what you have, you can't do everything we just talked about. But this can help you to drive toward improving your visibility and improving your inventory capabilities as well.
Right. I'm going to put a link for the people in the chat. Maybe they'll take a look at that later. It's from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's part of the Department of Homeland Security. And that, that's just one of the sources people can use for free to take a look at what CISA has put out there as exploited vulnerabilities in the wild.
Hey, one thing that I'm going to bring up as we pivot into this, the final downside of the conversation here. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, share with us some success stories or more importantly, what kind of what's in it for me? Meaning, what does all this mean for my managed services practice? And I think Steve, maybe you hit on it. You leverage, we obviously leverage the coded tool set, correct? More importantly, it's your team that is looking at all the analytics behind it, helping our managed services partners understand how to prioritize and what to prioritize, in hopes that your billable engineers and network infrastructure gurus can go back to work doing the things that generate meaningful revenue, and that we can provide you tangible assets in hopes that you can, break it down from a prioritization standpoint. So I think that it's a common question that we get. Definitely wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
And in terms of resolution, Steve, give us your thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, and to what JP was talking about, like it's all about providing evidence of provided value, right? We need to give you the ability to go back to your customer and say, hey, this is what we've done for you. This is how we're helping you to stay more secure, to stay more operationally efficient, to do all of the things that we do. And this is just one piece. And part of our output from the services that we offer is that capability. You have the ability to sit down with your customer and say, all right, we need to remediate these vulnerabilities, which gives some potential opportunity to go back and say, hey, we've got a lot of vulnerabilities we need to clear away, and we're out of hours, or we're out of scope of what the existing services are. Maybe we can help you remediate some of these vulnerabilities by adding some additional time or additional services to that capability. So helping you to generate some revenue based on that output as well, but also just proving value, right? And part of that is in the vulnerability remediation or vulnerability resolution piece, right? If you can sit down and have a conversation about understanding and knowing how you are reducing risk within that business and within their core infrastructure, then you have an opportunity to sit down and say, all right, this is everything we're doing for you. Go in and set up and establish regular maintenance windows. A lot of organizations already have this. Are you using it to patch and update your systems, or are you using it to, maybe you have a guy go in and do backups, and you got a change freeze in place for a short period of time in order to do backups, or whatever it might be, right? Add patching, add the vulnerability remediation piece to that opportunity. And as I mentioned, as kind of the third bullet here mentions, develop a program, pardon me, with that customer that includes scanning, testing those patches on a limited use case, and then patch those vulnerable systems, and then scan immediately once again. And then we've already hit on this, but focus on the vulnerabilities that have active exploits. Capacity is less important than prioritizing. Prioritization should be everything that you're focusing on when it comes to vulnerability remediation.
And that's because,
question.
Yeah.
Sorry, question came out of the chat room. Can the Coda product platform, and you can answer this versus the sales guy, can the Coda product platform similarly replace rapid fire tools?
Yes, it can. Successfully.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you haven't. So yeah, it's much more powerful than Network Detective. And going back to what Steve mentioned around prioritization, that's important because your resources as a partner aren't unlimited. They're directly related to the budget that the customer is spending, and your time is the most important time. So let's get that time invested into those remediations that actually matter, and that's going to move the ball forward. And a lot of times we're getting this question from partners and saying, yeah, but our customers are expecting us to be doing all of that. So how do we increase? How do we ask for a price increase? And well, we've seen a lot of successful strategies from partners that are doing that, and most of the time it's easy for net new accounts, right? It's a little bit more difficult on existing recurring customers. But not just the cost of this, is extremely low compared to the value that it provides. And you can have those, you can use free assessments, you can use free tools to get those conversations started. And maybe Steve, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked through a lot of that already, right? And in building a different kind of conversation, and it may have seemed set up, but I absolutely did not set up that question about how we approached disaster recovery and cloud adoption 10 years ago to JP. That wasn't a set up thing. I think we have the tools at our disposal to make good headway from this with security folks. And if we look at the way we sold cloud adoption and we sold disaster recovery and the tools available there, like actually from a security perspective compared to 10 years ago, the complete black and white yin and yang of what we had versus what we have now is incredible. Like there's a vast amount of tools that we have at our disposal, including organizations like ours that are helping MSPs to go out and prove that value and show why security is important. That didn't exist 10 years ago, right? And so I think just using the tools that you have at your disposal that we've talked about today and that Green Cloud Defense continues to offer is going to go a long way to proving that for sure. And I think it's just a change in the way we have the conversation, changing it from, hey, we need to secure your environment and here's the cost and you're just going to have to do it because compliance or because, insurance needs it. No, let's talk about actual business risk. Let's talk about how, this is going to make us more resilient in the face of disaster, in the face of, the FBI, CISA, everybody today is talking about, extreme amounts of cyber activity around the Russia and Ukraine regions right now, right? There's a lot of activity coming from that region of the world right now, right? Well, we don't want to be, lingering out there as the ones that get affected by that as just a casual bystander that happens to get affected by virtue of the fact that we're on the internet and insecure. And my point is we have the tools, we have an increased threat landscape, and we need to have different kinds of discussions versus, hey, you just have to do this and here's the cost. It needs to be a conversation about let's make your business more resilient and make sure that you're going to live beyond whatever the next thing is, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's, in the early 2000s, everybody wanted to talk about how disaster recovery was important in business continuity because what happens if a plane crashes down in the middle of our building, right? And that was like what everybody used to sell cloud and disaster recovery. And we have the same opportunity now to just say, hey, you don't want to be a victim to one of these. Let's have some business risk discussions and put the things in place that we need to ahead of time so that we don't have a huge exposure to the risks associated with operating in the world today in a very digital kind of environment. So.
Yeah, and listen, as we've come up on the tail end of the conversation, I'll leave everybody with this, which is, it's going to go back to a similar question that was posed of how are other MSPs leveraging it and what's it do. There's a story of one of our partners that serves two major markets. When I say major markets, both of which have, MBA teams, they're very big markets, highly congested MSP spaces. They're actually leveraging the tool set to separate themselves from the rest of the pack, the rest of the MSP herd within their respective cities. And what they're doing is they are leading with a very secure-oriented mindset first, letting their prospects and their existing customers know that, yes, they're scanning, they're testing, they're patching, they're scanning again, and they're sharing those tangible assets to not just protect their clients. That's at the top of the list, but it's literally designed to outwit, outsmart, and outrun the competition in those cities. So take that for what it's worth. But Steve, Chris, any closing remarks as we tie this thing up here today?
I mean, I don't think so. I'm not going to continue to beat the horse dead that I've done. Just if you have any questions, I'm available on LinkedIn, on email. Pick up the phone, give me a shout. JP can get a hold of me anytime. If you have any questions about how we can help here, or if you're an existing customer, how we can assist in showing that value, just give us a shout. I think there's a lot of good conversations going on with a ton of our partners about how we can reduce their risk and solve some of those problems. So just give us a shout for sure.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Steve, as always, appreciate you bouncing on here with me, and for our partners out there, take care, and we will chat with you soon. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
It was nice talking to you guys.
Yeah.